Imagine hosting your favorite uncle for a weekend, sharing meals and conversations, watching him settle into your guest room for the night, saying goodbye as he drives away the next morning, then calling him later that day, only to have him insist with absolute certainty that he never left his house, never visited you, and has no memory of the entire experience you both supposedly shared. Now imagine his wife backing up his claim with irrefutable evidence that he was home the entire time while you're holding the reading glasses he forgot on your nightstand, staring at the half-eaten plate of food he left at breakfast, looking at text messages he sent thanking you for your hospitality. This impossible contradiction between memory and evidence is exactly what happened to Sarah Mitchell, and her experience would reveal something deeply unsettling about the nature of identity, dimension, and the possibility that the people we know might exist in multiple versions across parallel realities. Sarah had always been close to her Uncle Tom. He was her father's younger brother, the fun uncle who remembered birthdays, told terrible jokes, and made an effort to stay connected despite living 3 hours away. When Tom called on Friday afternoon asking if he could visit for the weekend, Sarah was delighted. Her husband Mark was traveling for work, and she welcomed the company. They made plans for Tom to arrive around 6 p.m., stay through Sunday morning, and catch up on months of family news. Tom arrived exactly on time, pulling into Sarah's driveway in his familiar blue Honda, the same car he'd been driving for 5 years. Sarah watched from the window as he grabbed an overnight bag from the trunk, the same leather weekender bag she'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. Everything about his arrival was completely normal, completely consistent with the uncle she'd known her entire life. The evening unfolded with comfortable familiarity. Sarah made her uncle's favorite dinner, chicken parmesan with garlic bread, and they ate at her kitchen table while Tom caught her up on his life. He talked about his recent retirement from teaching, about the woodworking projects he'd taken up to fill his days, about his concerns regarding his wife Linda's health issues. Sarah shared stories about her own work stress, her frustrations with home repairs that never seemed to end, her hopes for an upcoming vacation. After dinner, they moved to the living room and watched a movie together. One of those mindless action films that Tom loved and Sarah tolerated because she enjoyed his company. Tom fell asleep on the couch halfway through, snoring softly in the way that had been his habit for as long as Sarah could remember. She woke him gently around 11 p.m. and showed him to the guest room, where she'd already laid out fresh towels and made up the bed with the quilt her grandmother had made. Tom thanked her for her hospitality, hugged her goodnight, and closed the guest room door. Sarah heard him moving around for a few minutes, the familiar sounds of someone settling in for the night, water running in the bathroom, the creak of the bed frame, the click of the bedside lamp being turned off, then silence, and Sarah went to her own room feeling content about a pleasant evening with family. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee. She found Tom in her kitchen, having figured out her coffee maker, and helped himself to breakfast. They spent the morning talking over coffee and toast, Tom sharing more stories about his retirement, Sarah describing her recent promotion at work. It was exactly the kind of relaxed, unhurried family time that Sarah had been hoping for when Tom suggested the visit. Around noon, Tom announced he should get on the road before traffic got bad. He packed his overnight bag, double-checked that he had his phone and wallet, and gave Sarah a long hug goodbye. They made vague plans for Sarah to visit him and Linda next month, and Tom climbed into his blue Honda and drove away. Sarah waved from the porch, watching until his car disappeared around the corner. It was a perfectly normal visit in every way. Sarah cleaned up the guest room, stripping the bed and gathering the towels Tom had used. That's when she found his reading glasses on the nightstand, the distinctive tortoiseshell frames she'd seen him wear countless times. She immediately sent him a text. "You forgot your glasses. I'll mail them to you this week." Tom's response came 20 minutes later. "What glasses? I'm home. Haven't been anywhere." Sarah stared at the message, certain Tom was joking. She replied, "Very funny. The ones you left on the nightstand in my guest room." The next message took longer to arrive, and when it did, Sarah's comfortable certainty began to crack. "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't visit you this weekend. I've been home the entire time. Linda's been sick, remember? I told you last week I couldn't come because I needed to stay with her." Sarah's hand started shaking as she typed her response. "Uncle Tom, this isn't funny. You just left my house 20 minutes ago. We had dinner last night, watched a movie. You slept in my guest room. We had breakfast together this morning. Stop joking around." Her phone rang almost immediately. It was Tom, and his voice carried genuine confusion and concern. "Sarah, honey, I'm worried about you. I never left my house this weekend. Linda's been in bed with the flu since Thursday. I've been taking care of her, barely left her side. I would never come visit and leave her alone when she's sick." Sarah felt her reality beginning to tilt. "Uncle Tom, you're scaring me. You were here. I'm holding your glasses right now, the ones with the tortoiseshell frames. You left them on my nightstand." There was a long pause before Tom responded, his voice taking on a strange quality that Sarah couldn't quite identify. "Sarah, those glasses. I'm wearing those glasses right now. I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm wearing them. They never left my house." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Sarah insisting on the reality of Tom's visit, and Tom becoming increasingly agitated as he denied ever leaving his home. Finally, he put Linda on the phone, and his wife confirmed everything Tom had said. He'd been home all weekend, taking care of her, making soup, checking her temperature, helping her to the bathroom. She'd been with him almost constantly, and he definitely hadn't driven 3 hours to visit his niece. After hanging up, Sarah walked through her house in a daze, gathering evidence of Tom's visit. The plate he'd used at breakfast, still in the sink with traces of his partially eaten toast. The coffee mug he'd drunk from, sitting on the counter. The guest room bed, unmade and showing clear signs that someone had slept in it. The bathroom towels, damp from his morning shower. Every physical detail confirmed that Tom had been there, had spent the night, had existed in her home for nearly 18 hours. Sarah checked her text message history with Tom and found their exchange from Friday afternoon, discussing his arrival time and what he wanted for dinner. She found his text from Saturday morning, asking if she wanted him to pick up anything from the store. She had a paper trail of a visit that Tom now insisted had never occurred. Most disturbing was when Sarah checked her home security camera footage. She watched Tom's blue Honda pull into her driveway at 6:04 p.m. on Friday. She watched him get out of the car, grab his overnight bag, and walk to her front door. She watched herself letting him in, greeting him with a hug. The footage was clear and unmistakable. Tom had been there. She fast-forwarded through the evening, seeing glimpses of them moving past the camera's field of view as they went from kitchen to living room. She saw Tom leaving Sunday morning, getting into his car, backing out of the driveway. Every moment was documented, every interaction preserved in digital format. Sarah sent screenshots of the security footage to Tom's phone, along with photos of his forgotten glasses, the dirty dishes, the unmade guest bed. His response was immediate and frightened. "Sarah, that's not possible. I'm looking at my car right now, parked in my garage. It never left. I can show you the GPS log. It hasn't moved all weekend. And those glasses you're holding." "I'm still wearing mine. I don't understand what's happening." Over the next week, Sarah and Tom tried desperately to make sense of the contradiction. Tom drove to Sarah's house with Linda, bringing his reading glasses to compare them with the pair Sarah had found. The glasses were identical, down to a small scratch on the left lens and a barely visible repair on the bridge where Tom had fixed them with superglue 6 months earlier. They were the same glasses, somehow existing in 2 places simultaneously. Tom's car showed GPS logs proving it had never left his garage all weekend. His credit cards showed no gas station purchases for the trip. His phone's location data placed him at home continuously from Thursday night through Monday morning. Every piece of electronic evidence supported his claim that he'd never visited Sarah. But Sarah's security cameras told a different story. The footage clearly showed Tom arriving, staying, and leaving. The license plate on the car in the video matched Tom's car exactly. The overnight bag Tom had carried was the same bag currently sitting in Tom's hall closet, but Sarah found hair and skin cells on her guest room pillowcase that DNA testing later confirmed matched Tom's genetic profile. The contradiction was absolute and impossible to reconcile. Tom had simultaneously been in 2 places at once: home with his sick wife and visiting his niece 3 hours away. Both realities had equal evidence supporting them. Both versions of the weekend had witnesses, physical proof, and documented records. Sarah wasn't the only person experiencing this phenomenon. Within weeks of sharing her story online, she connected with Marcus Chen, whose brother had visited for a birthday party, stayed overnight, given an expensive gift, then insisted the next day that he'd been out of town on business and had never attended any party. Marcus still had the gift, a watch worth several $1,000s that his brother supposedly couldn't afford to replace and swore he'd never purchased. Jennifer Walsh described an even more elaborate situation. Her sister Rachel had visited for an entire week, staying in Jennifer's spare room, going sightseeing together, having long conversations every evening. When Rachel returned home, she called Jennifer in confusion, asking why Jennifer kept texting thank you messages for a visit that had never occurred. According to Rachel and her husband, she'd been home all week, working on a major project at her company, attending meetings, having dinner with her husband every night. But Jennifer had a week's worth of evidence, restaurant receipts with both their names, photos they'd taken together at tourist attractions, even a speeding ticket Rachel had received when Jennifer let her borrow the car. The photos showed Rachel clearly, smiling at landmarks, holding ice cream cones, standing next to Jennifer in front of famous monuments. These weren't old photos or fabricated images. They were recent, time-stamped, and absolutely genuine. The pattern repeated across dozens of cases. Guests who visited, stayed overnight or longer, left physical evidence of their presence, then insisted with complete sincerity that they'd never left home. In every case, the guests' family members confirmed their stay-at-home version of events, providing alibis and evidence that the guest had indeed been somewhere else during the supposed visit. What made these cases particularly unsettling was the quality of the evidence on both sides. The hosts had security footage, physical objects left behind, DNA evidence, and documented interactions. The guests had GPS logs, credit card records, work attendance logs, and witnesses confirming their presence elsewhere. Both sets of evidence were genuine. Both versions of events were supported by facts, yet they described mutually exclusive realities. Dr. Amanda Foster, who had been studying reality anomalies for years, became interested in the guest phenomenon when she noticed that it seemed to be increasing in frequency. What had been rare isolated incidents were becoming regular occurrences, with new cases reported almost daily. She began documenting patterns that suggested these weren't simple cases of confused memory or fabricated evidence. The guests who supposedly visited while also staying home were always people with close emotional connections to their hosts. Family members, old friends, romantic partners. The visits always involved emotionally significant interactions, important conversations, celebrations, quality time together. These weren't random strangers or casual acquaintances, but people who mattered deeply to each other. Most importantly, the physical evidence left behind by the visiting version of the guest was always authentic. DNA testing confirmed genetic matches. Fingerprints matched official records. Personal belongings like glasses, phones, or clothing were genuine items that the guest recognized as their own, even while insisting they'd never brought them to the host's home. Sarah found herself questioning everything about her relationship with Uncle Tom. If the Tom who had visited wasn't real, in the sense that the original Tom remembered it, then who was the person she'd shared dinner with? Who had slept in her guest room, laughed at her jokes, given her advice about her work problems? The visiting Tom had seemed completely authentic in every way. He'd known family stories that only the real Tom would know, had the same mannerisms and speech patterns, had memories of shared experiences going back to Sarah's childhood. If this was somehow a copy or duplicate, it was a perfect one, indistinguishable from the original in any meaningful way. The psychological impact on both hosts and guests was severe. Hosts felt gaslit, their clear memories and abundant evidence dismissed by guests who seemed genuinely confused. Guests felt accused of lying or having memory problems, their documented alibis somehow insufficient to convince hosts that a visit had never occurred. Families fractured over these incidents. Sarah's relationship with Uncle Tom became strained and careful, with both of them avoiding the topic of the visit that never happened, while neither could fully move past it. Marcus stopped speaking to his brother entirely after months of arguments about the birthday party. Jennifer's relationship with her sister Rachel deteriorated into mutual suspicion and hurt feelings. The guests who denied their visits weren't lying or confused. They genuinely had no memory of the time they'd supposedly spent with their hosts, and their evidence of being elsewhere was entirely legitimate. But the hosts weren't imagining or fabricating their experiences either. The visits had occurred, had been real in every measurable way, had left behind undeniable proof. The only explanation that seemed to fit the evidence was the most disturbing one. The guests who visited were somehow different versions of the same people, perhaps from parallel realities where they'd made the decision to visit rather than staying home. These dimensional duplicates were identical to the originals in every way, carrying the same memories, the same personalities, the same genetic makeup, but existing in timelines where different choices had led to different outcomes. For Sarah, holding her Uncle Tom's reading glasses while knowing he was simultaneously wearing identical glasses 3 hours away, the implication was clear and terrifying. The people we love might exist in multiple versions across parallel realities, and sometimes those versions could slip through dimensional barriers visiting us while their original selves remained obliviously elsewhere, creating impossible situations where the same person existed in 2 places at once, living 2 different versions of the same weekend, with neither version fully aware of the other. The guest who never visited had revealed that identity itself might be less stable than anyone had imagined, that consciousness could perhaps fragment across multiple realities, and that the person sitting across the dinner table might be simultaneously sitting somewhere else entirely, with both versions equally real, equally valid, and equally certain of their own existence. Sarah Mitchell's impossible weekend with an uncle who simultaneously was and wasn't there marked the beginning of something far more widespread and disturbing. Within months, thousands of similar cases emerged from across the globe, each following the same impossible pattern. Guests who visited left undeniable evidence of their presence, then insisted with absolute certainty and supporting documentation that they'd never left home. What had seemed like an isolated impossibility was revealing itself to be a systematic breakdown in the boundaries between parallel realities, allowing dimensional duplicates to cross over and interact with people who knew their originals, creating situations where the same person could exist in 2 places at once with neither version fully aware of the other. The Chen family case brought the phenomenon into sharp focus and revealed disturbing new dimensions to the visitor paradox. David and Linda Chen hosted what they thought was Linda's entire family for Thanksgiving: her parents, her 3 siblings, their spouses, and 5 grandchildren. It was a massive gathering with 14 people spending 3 days at their home, involving elaborate meal preparation, family games, and the kind of chaotic multi-generational celebration that families remember for years. The gathering was documented extensively. David and Linda took dozens of photos showing the whole family together, shot video of the children playing, captured moments of the adults sharing stories around the dinner table. They had 3 days of security camera footage showing cars arriving, people coming and going, the house full of activity and life. When the last family members drove away on Sunday evening, David and Linda felt the satisfying exhaustion that comes from successful hosting. They'd pulled off a major family event, everyone had enjoyed themselves, and the house was full of leftover food and good memories. They spent Monday morning cleaning up, texting thank you messages to family members, and sharing the photos they'd taken. The responses were immediate and bewildering. Linda's parents called in confusion, asking why Linda kept thanking them for a Thanksgiving visit they hadn't made. They'd spent the holiday at home, just the 2 of them, having a quiet dinner because the whole family had canceled plans weeks ago due to various scheduling conflicts. Linda's siblings sent similar messages. They'd all been at their own homes for Thanksgiving, had their own separate celebrations, and were baffled by Linda's references to a gathering that had never occurred. But David and Linda had 3 days of photos showing all these people in their home. They had video of Linda's father carving the turkey, of her mother playing with the grandchildren, of siblings laughing together in the living room. They had receipts for the massive amount of food they'd purchased to feed 14 people. They had security footage showing every arrival and departure. Most disturbing was what happened when Linda's family compared photos. David and Linda's pictures showed family members wearing specific outfits, hairstyles, and accessories. Linda's parents had photos from their own quiet Thanksgiving, showing them wearing the exact same outfits, down to the same jewelry and the same small details like her father's watch and her mother's earrings. The siblings' separate Thanksgiving celebrations showed them in the same clothing they supposedly wore at David and Linda's house. It was as if 14 people had somehow duplicated themselves, with one version staying home for Thanksgiving while identical copies gathered at David and Linda's house. Both sets of events had occurred simultaneously. Both were documented with photographic and video evidence. Both involved the same people wearing the same clothes and exhibiting the same personalities and mannerisms. When Linda's family agreed to meet in person to compare their evidence, the situation became even more impossible to explain. The physical objects left behind at David and Linda's house were genuine. Linda's mother's scarf that she'd supposedly forgotten, with her distinctive perfume still detectable on the fabric. Her father's reading glasses, identical to the ones he was currently wearing. A toy one of the grandchildren had left behind, which the child's parents recognized immediately, but insisted the child had never brought to David and Linda's house, because the child had never gone there. DNA testing on drinking glasses and utensils used during the Thanksgiving meal confirmed genetic matches with Linda's family members. Fingerprints on surfaces throughout the house matched official records. Every forensic test proved that Linda's actual biological family had been in that house, eating that meal, celebrating that holiday, despite simultaneously being documented as present in their own separate homes. The phenomenon wasn't limited to family gatherings. Corporate meetings began showing similar patterns of dimensional duplication. Robert Kim attended what he thought was an important client presentation with 6 colleagues, spending an entire afternoon in a conference room working through a crucial pitch. The meeting seemed successful, the client appeared satisfied, and Robert's team celebrated afterward over dinner. The next morning, Robert's boss called him in for a meeting, asking why Robert had missed the client presentation. According to everyone else at the company, the presentation had been canceled at the last minute due to the client's scheduling conflict. Robert's 6 colleagues all confirmed they'd never attended any meeting, had spent that afternoon working at their desks or in other meetings. But Robert had the presentation slides on his laptop, complete with notes he'd typed during the meeting. He had business cards from the client representatives who'd attended. He had a receipt from the restaurant where the team had celebrated afterward, with credit card charges from all 7 attendees. His calendar showed the blocked time, his emails referenced the meeting, and he could describe in detail every aspect of the presentation and the client's response. When Robert checked his company's security footage, it showed him entering the conference room with 6 colleagues, exactly as he remembered. But when his boss checked the same footage from the company's central server, it showed the conference room sitting empty all afternoon with no meeting occurring. Both were looking at footage from the same cameras, same timestamps, but seeing completely different events. The dimensional visitor phenomenon seemed to intensify around emotionally significant events. Amanda Foster's mother visited for her daughter's birthday, spending a week helping Amanda celebrate, attending a party, giving generous gifts, and sharing quality time together. When the visit ended and Amanda's mother returned home, she called Amanda in confusion, asking why Amanda kept sending thank you messages for a visit that had never happened. According to Amanda's father, his wife had been home all week, fighting a severe cold that had kept her in bed. He'd been taking care of her, and she'd been too sick to travel anywhere, let alone drive 6 hours to visit their daughter. Medical records showed multiple doctor visits during that week, prescriptions filled at their local pharmacy, evidence of an illness that would have made travel impossible. Yet Amanda had a week of memories with her perfectly healthy mother. Shopping trips, long conversations over coffee, help planning and executing the birthday party, a closeness they hadn't shared in years. Amanda had photos of her mother looking healthy and happy, gifts her mother had given her, even a jacket her mother had forgotten when she left. The jacket was one Amanda's father recognized immediately, the same jacket currently hanging in their hall closet, somehow existing in both locations simultaneously. Children seemed particularly susceptible to visits from dimensional duplicates. 8-year-old Sophie Martinez had her best friend Emily sleep over for what Sophie's parents thought was a normal weekend sleepover. The girls played together, watched movies, giggled through the night in the way that young friends do. Sophie's parents drove Emily home Sunday morning, watching her run into her house and wave goodbye. That afternoon, Emily's mother called in confusion, asking if there had been a change of plans. According to Emily and her family, the sleepover had been canceled because Emily had a dance recital that weekend. Emily had been at dance practices and performances all weekend, with dozens of witnesses and video footage from the recital. She'd never left home, never slept at Sophie's house, had no memory of the sleepover that Sophie and her parents insisted had occurred. But Sophie's parents had 2 days of security footage showing Emily arriving, playing in their yard, coming inside for meals. They had photos of the girls together, evidence of Emily's overnight bag in the guest room, a hairbrush Emily had left behind that her mother immediately recognized as Emily's distinctive purple brush with unicorn stickers, the same brush currently sitting on Emily's dresser at home. The psychological impact on children who'd hosted dimensional duplicates was particularly severe. Sophie couldn't understand why her best friend didn't remember their perfect weekend together. She felt hurt and confused, wondering if Emily was lying or if their friendship meant less to Emily than it did to her. Sophie's parents struggled to explain a situation they didn't understand themselves, unable to make their daughter comprehend that both versions of events were somehow true. Dr. Foster's research revealed that dimensional visitors often seemed more emotionally available, more present and more connected than their stay-at-home originals. Sarah's Uncle Tom had been warm and attentive during his visit, exactly the uncle she'd always hoped for. The version who'd stayed home dealing with his wife's illness had been stressed and distracted when Sarah called. It was as if the dimensional duplicate represented an idealized version of the person, free from the constraints and compromises that limited the original. Some people began deliberately trying to summon dimensional visitors, hoping to interact with better versions of loved ones who were difficult or distant in their primary reality. Michael Santos had a strained relationship with his father, marked by decades of disappointment and emotional distance. When a dimensional duplicate of his father visited unexpectedly, showing warmth and paternal affection the original had never demonstrated, Michael found himself wishing the duplicate could stay permanently. But the dimensional visitors always had to return to wherever they came from, vanishing back to their own realities and leaving their hosts with memories of connections that the originals didn't share. Michael's actual father had no memory of their emotional reconciliation, no awareness of the conversations they'd supposedly had, no change in the fundamental distance that had always characterized their relationship. Attempts to prevent dimensional visitors from leaving or to maintain contact with them across realities proved unsuccessful. When hosts tried to keep visitors overnight beyond their intended stay, the visitors would inexplicably vanish, simply ceasing to exist in one reality and presumably returning to their own. When hosts tried to exchange contact information specific to the visit, phone numbers and addresses would prove to be incorrect or would connect to confused originals who had no context for the communication. The frequency of dimensional visits seemed to be increasing exponentially. What had been rare anomalies were becoming common enough that most people knew someone who'd experienced a guest who never visited. Support groups formed to help both hosts and guests cope with the psychological impact of these impossible situations. But the groups often devolved into arguments about whose version of events was real, whose evidence was more legitimate, whose reality should take precedence. Families fractured over repeated incidents of dimensional visitation. The Martinez clan experienced multiple cases where various family members visited each other while simultaneously being documented as elsewhere, creating a web of conflicting memories and incompatible evidence that made every family gathering tense and confusing. No one knew whether they were interacting with originals or dimensional duplicates, whether memories they shared would be mutual or one-sided, whether relationships they thought they were building existed in shared reality or only in the experience of one person. The evidence suggested that dimensional visitors weren't random, but seemed to represent specific alternate versions of people. The visitors came from realities where they had made different choices, choosing to visit rather than stay home, prioritizing relationships over other obligations, acting on impulses they'd suppressed in their original timeline. Every dimensional visitor represented a path not taken, a decision made differently, a version of the person that existed in a parallel reality where slightly different circumstances had led to different outcomes. Most disturbing were cases where dimensional visitors revealed information about their own realities that suggested significant divergence from the host's world. Linda Chen's visiting mother mentioned family members who died in Linda's reality, but were apparently alive in the mother's original timeline. Robert Kim's dimensional colleagues referenced company projects that had never been initiated in Robert's reality, but apparently existed in theirs. These were different worlds, not just different versions of the same events, suggesting that dimensional barriers were breaking down across significantly divergent timelines. Government agencies attempted to study and document the phenomenon, but dimensional visits proved impossible to predict or control. Researchers could document visits after they'd occurred, could verify the evidence left behind, could confirm through DNA and fingerprint analysis that visitors were genuine duplicates of their originals. But they couldn't determine which people would split into dimensional duplicates, which visits would occur, or how to facilitate or prevent the phenomenon. The implications for identity and consciousness were profound and disturbing. If people could exist as dimensional duplicates, visiting one timeline while their original remained in another, what did that mean about the continuity of self? Were the duplicates separate beings with independent consciousness, or were they somehow linked to their originals, sharing some deeper level of identity that transcended individual timelines? Hosts who'd spent time with dimensional visitors often reported feeling that they'd connected with a truer version of the person, as if the duplicate represented authentic qualities that the original had learned to suppress or hide. Guests who learned about their duplicates' visits often felt disturbed by descriptions of behavior they didn't recognize, as if confronting an alternative self who'd made different choices and developed different aspects of their personality. The most unsettling theory to emerge from Dr. Foster's research was that dimensional visits might be increasing because the barriers between parallel realities were fundamentally weakening. If multiple versions of every person existed across infinite timelines, and those versions were beginning to slip between realities with increasing frequency, then perhaps individual identity itself was beginning to dissolve into multiplicity. For hosts like Sarah Mitchell holding her Uncle Tom's abandoned glasses while knowing he was simultaneously wearing identical glasses elsewhere, the question became less about which version of Tom was real, and more about whether the concept of a single unified Tom had ever been accurate. Perhaps everyone existed as infinite variations across countless timelines, and what seemed like a stable, singular identity was actually a temporary illusion created by consciousness residing primarily in one timeline at a time. The dimensional visitors had revealed that the people we love might be fragmented across infinite realities, that any interaction might involve duplicates rather than originals, and that the memories we create with someone might not be shared if we're connecting with a dimensional visitor rather than their primary self. Every conversation, every hug goodbye, every promise made might exist only in one person's memory if the other participant was a temporary visitor from an alternate timeline. The most terrifying implication was that perhaps everyone was both host and visitor, both original and duplicate, existing simultaneously across multiple realities without full awareness of their own multiplicity. Sarah's Uncle Tom who visited might have been equally real as the Tom who stayed home, both versions genuine expressions of the same consciousness fragmenting across parallel existences, with neither having priority or authenticity over the other. The guest who never visited had taught humanity that identity is far less stable than anyone imagined, that consciousness might naturally exist across multiple timelines, and that the boundaries between parallel selves are permeable enough for duplicates to cross over, interact, and create experiences that one version remembers while another remains oblivious. Until every human connection becomes uncertain, every shared memory potentially one-sided, and every person we think we know might be a visitor from dimensions we can't access, living parallel lives we'll never share.